Welcome to the Digital Marketing Insights podcast, brought to you by Brightside Digital.
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to say today we have Nadaline, Director of Marketing. Nadaline, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, Tom. Pretty good. Thanks for the invite.
It's great having you. Nadaline, we always start off the show the same. Can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your career today, please?
I can. So I suppose I came from a sales background into marketing, which is helpful. I've been working as a director of marketing or director of content in primarily the legal technology space for the past couple of years, although I've recently moved into agriculture as an industry, which was an interesting sort of sideways shift. I now work in consultancy, so I consult with companies as opposed to working within them, mostly startups, but obviously in the agricultural industry, I'm working with representative bodies, which is a whole new area of marketing that I'm really excited to be exploring.
And what would you see as your main strength in digital now at the moment? Definitely
content. It's always been my main strength, and I think it's sometimes underestimated as being a part of digital marketing, but to me, it's always the fuel for everything that you do. Quite what type it should be or the content it should be. Driving engagement is really the key part of digital marketing as far as I'm concerned.
Brilliant. And to dive into that a little bit more, any particular content you're really into? Do you specialize in video or written content? Is it more organic on social, that kind of thing? How do you go about producing content?
So there's a very real lean towards written content for me personally, but that's of course not always what we do within the organization. So it depends. It depends on the needs of the company at the time, the goals that they're driving towards. I think that sometimes in marketing we forget that, and it's true more so in younger companies than older, more established companies, that there's always a specific goal on the table that we're reaching towards. So I think, are you trying to build brand recognition in a new vertical? Are you running sales campaigns primarily? Are you hoping to impress investors into putting a big check on your desk? It really depends on what it is that the company is trying to achieve as to the type of content that is going to achieve more towards those goals than others.
And I know obviously different content depending on the industry and the companies you're working for. Is there any examples or anything that you think our listeners or people should be keeping an eye out content-wise? Maybe you can make it specific to an industry, but anything you think it is having great growth results at the moment?
Oh, I probably have a contentious view on that. I think that we tend to play to our own strengths as marketers, which absolutely, of course, is something that we should be doing. But a fair amount of the time content is produced of a type and in a way that's what we think should be effective or that we think people should like. I think that we don't ask people enough. We don't engage with audiences enough to find out what appeals to them and what they're looking for. And sometimes they don't know. Of course, that's a valid concern. But I think engagement with the audience as opposed to internal decision-making should be what drives the selection and types of content as opposed to what we think is pretty.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. And in terms of reporting, how would you advise your clients and stuff to export out and track those kind of KPIs? What's your go-to kind of reporting?
So different companies use different softwares. So some companies will use HubSpot, others will use Pardo, others will use maybe WordPress or Wix. The critical point, I suppose, for me is that I'm always driving towards a number, regardless of what it is that I'm doing. So more reporting is fantastic and you really, really need it. But understanding what that means and what you should do about it is a completely different skill set in my view. So, in terms of in your email marketing, your open rates, playing with subject lines, understanding the audience well enough to understand why a trend is moving down or up is really important to be able to work strategically towards that number that you're working towards. So reporting is critically important, but interpretation of it is a whole different art form, I think, from my own perspective.
With experience, you can look at the data. Sometimes data isn't as straightforward as just looking at the real numbers. You have to have that kind of black box thinking of how to interpret this. Is this the full story? I'm doing a lot of work on that at the moment. But yeah, I completely agree with that.
For sure, because people are complex. They're not, simple creatures. You press this button and they leap to purchase this thing. And sometimes the conclusions we draw are so far off, it's not even funny. And sometimes the correct conclusion is something we hit on by accident. It's not an exact science. It is an art form. But it is inevitably more complex than people assume it to be.
I completely agree. Just to give an example of that, I've just read the book Black Box Thinking, and there's a section in it.
Oh, Matthew Syed.
Yeah, have you read it? Yeah, it's the one bit that really stayed with me is when they're talking about the World War II planes, and they were getting people to look at it. And once all the planes were arriving back, there was always bullet holes in the wings and everything else, everything away from the cockpit and the fuel tank. And what the military at the time were thinking about was reinforcing the wings and basically the tail and a couple of other areas. But actually, it was one of the scientists that identified that those were the planes that were returning. The ones that actually fall in enemy spaces were the ones where obviously bullet holes and stuff were penetrating the cockpit or the fuel tank. So they were the areas that needed to be reinforced. And I suppose it's a good point around data in general, is if you have all this data in front of you, you have to still think, okay, but what's the bigger picture here? And I think it's quite a good way of explaining it, I suppose, when you're analyzing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are correct, because like that, we all, see what's in front of us and we interpret things based on our own experience. And so the risk is that you're carrying experience at a different company or, time working towards a different goal. It's always a bit of a mental puzzle. And that's probably the part of the work that I enjoy the most, is just that seeing what ticks, seeing what doesn't, trying to turn things and work out why it's happening this way as opposed to that way. That's the crux of the issue, really, in terms of digital marketing. Everything else is how you activate those conclusions, if you will. But that's the core of performing digital marketing to me.
Yeah. And obviously, one of the big differences in marketing is your B2B to B2C kind of marketing. Do you operate in both areas, or do you tend to focus on one or the other?
Always focused on B2B. More recently, with the move into the agricultural industry, stepping more into B2C. And it's an interesting shift, because the differences are, of course, enormous. Between talking to, and obviously farmers are very educated in the art of farming, but they're not necessarily very educated in the art of representing themselves in public, which is a whole different kind of ball game for them. Whereas when you're dealing with a professional, really, really educated, really insightful body of people, your level of knowledge to be able to speak to them must be much, much higher. The same does apply in B2C, in my limited experience of it, because obviously farmers are experts in their field too. So acquiring knowledge at speed is one of those things I'm always working on.
Are you tired of working a job you hate? I'm Mark Savant, host of the After Hours Entrepreneur Podcast, and I know that feeling. I used to wake up every morning dreading the day, and after years of effort, I was able to leave my job and do something that I love. You can too. The After Hours Entrepreneur Podcast is your guide to building profitable six-figure years. I'm sharing the lessons that I wish I knew and bringing on experts like Pat Flynn, Jasmine Starr, and more. Click the link. You don't need to dread Mondays anymore. Take action and build a life you love.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And do you have a setup to acquire knowledge like that? How would you go about collecting knowledge and content, I suppose?
This is the thing I'm always working on. So I am perennially in search of research software or writing software that is going to transform my life. But I go through, like all writers, I think we explore every new writing software that comes out as a useful distraction from actually having to do any writing. But no, I think that the research for me always starts with the people, because otherwise, I worry that you'd spend time on topics that you think are enormously interesting as somebody who sits outside of the industry, only to discover sometime later that the people inside the industry are well aware of that and don't care. So finding out from people where they're at right now, what topics are interesting to them, what questions are they called upon to answer. And useful content always ranks higher than interesting content. If you have content that genuinely helps them to do their job or solves a problem with an original twist or things that they don't know. One of the things that I love to do is talk to people about stuff they feel they don't know enough about, that they don't have time to research themselves. And if they can come to view you as a source for providing information that they can't easily get themselves or don't have time really to acquire, then that really does affect your conversion rates.
Really well said. And is there any particular campaign that you've done yourself that has been really successful in your eyes that you want to mention? Anything in your previous experience that you think, oh wow, that was a great moment?
There's a lot of them, in fairness. I think one of the things that I am proud of in the legal technology world is that I have a real affinity for lawyers. They're groups of people I've worked with for a long time, in particular intellectual property attorneys, but they're so much more generous with their knowledge and with their time than people imagine. They're far more entertaining than people would imagine. They're people I really enjoy working with, and a lot of them have a very real zeal, to adequately and maybe even fantastically represent their clients. And there came a moment in my time in the legal technology field where I realized that effectively a lot of content and marketing and advertising boils down to a subtle message that says, you'd be a better lawyer than you are today if you used our systems, which of course isn't at all true. Their skill sets are not something that is enhanced by software, but what you can do is you can reduce the amount of effort and heavy lifting that they're having to do in terms of everyday tasks. So you can give them more time to be as awesome as they are. But it was about understanding how lawyers feel about how they're presented by technology companies, by third-party vendors, and by the people in the industry generally, that lawyers are not particularly liked, and to emphasize how fantastic and fun and really good people they actually are. Their response to that was, it actually really did kind of mean something to me, fuzzy and all as it sounds and sort of emotional as it sounds. It's really, really nice to feel that you've struck the right balance in terms of the people that you want to speak to and how you're representing them in those communications. So it was nice. It took me shamefully longer than it should have for the penny to drop with that. But to then be sort of taking the lead in producing content that centers lawyers as they are and not how they're seen, I think that was quite important to me.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that on TikTok recently as well, where lawyers and different let's say governing bodies or practices or professionals like that, they're really starting to realize how to market themselves on new platforms and get that kind of organic reach quickly. Which kind of nicely leads on to my next question around softwares. Is there any softwares, you obviously mentioned it when you were talking about writing tools and stuff, but is there any that you swear by and still use on a regular basis?
No, I'm a perennial software addict, which might explain why I got so involved in the legal technology world. My two favorite things, law and software. Um, I don't perennially use anything because the needs of companies that I'm dealing with are so widely varied, and obviously you have to work with whatever systems they have on board. I'm always exploring software. There is one that kind of has my attention because a lot of the work that I do is strategic as well as creative. There's an app called Cascade that launched, I think, last year, and it is centered around building your strategies for the companies, obviously, but also for marketing and sales and marketing strategies. And it's really interesting. So I've been playing with that a lot recently. And I think that strategy is something, people produce strategies that look a lot more like a to-do list than a strategy. And to my mind, a strategy should answer the question, are we doing the right things? And your plan that comes from it should answer the question, are we doing them the right way? And I think that software could be really exciting in terms of how marketers can be helped to build an actual strategy as opposed to a marketing plan.
To touch on that a little bit more, can you explain how Cascade really works, like how it operates?
Sure. So it's a little bit like a cross between an online strategy fill in the box builder and I suppose a task management tool, if you will, that tracks progression of things. So it allows you to not only build your strategy, but roadmap it and break it down into actionable steps as you go. Very often, a strategy document is one that is completed at the C-suite level and then languishes in a desk drawer for the next couple of years. For a strategy to be successful, it needs buy-in at every level of the organization. And even if that's just a marketing strategy, if sales hasn't seen, didn't participate in, and wasn't a part of the evolution of your marketing strategy, it's unlikely to have the impact that you might hope. One of the things that I love is when, sales guys would come back from a conference and they had talked to people about marketing, about our marketing, and, they commented on blogs that they read or videos that they watched that they really loved, that they thought were great. Marketing contributes so much more to the development of the entire company than people give it credit for. Quite often it's dismissed internally as sort of that we're eternally wandering around in floaty dresses and sticking Post-it to things. It has real commercial value. And so having a strategy that emphasizes and delivers on that commercial value and that is seen across the organization as being immensely valuable, I think is very helpful to every marketer's career, regardless of what your career ambitions might be. I think that, when you can demonstrate deliverable results, then that's the most helpful thing you can do for your career. And the only way you can do that is with strategy and buy-in. So the real value of this tool then is it allows people to work collaboratively together to build that strategy, and it helps you communicate it across the organization and track the progress of it as you go.
Yeah, what a brilliant answer. And yeah, completely agree. Reporting and strategy is key. Is there away from your strengths at the moment, is there any areas you're looking to upskill into, and is there anywhere where you go to find new information or insights as well?
Oh, I'm always looking to upskill everything all of the time. I think for me, learning is a really big part of progressing because the industry moves so fast. Marketing as a whole is evolving at a rate of knots with new tools coming on board. It seems like every day. And, the industries that you're working with, they're evolving too. But I think for me, moving into different kinds of projects to expand my experience of things is something that I'm actively doing across this last year. So, it's one thing to say you will go in at the ground level of a startup and you will help them build, market penetration from there. It's another thing entirely to go into an existing organization that is suffering from a negative marketing campaign and seeing how you can strategize to reposition that effectively. That's a huge challenge, and it's one that I'm sort of taking on at the moment. So upskilling for me really is about taking on different kinds of projects with different kinds of goals in different environments, and then finding mentors and trailblazers in that, and not only picking their brains, but working to learn yourself, and always just do it better than you did it yesterday.
And looking at the digital industry as a whole, is there anything that you see coming in the future that you think might impact your work or the industries at hand?
I think there's a lot of manipulation in the marketing industry, and that's fair. I don't say that as a criticism, just as an observation. I think that there is a real trend when you have customer-led content, or really customer-focused marketing campaigns. We are seeing a huge push to authenticity. The trend is moving away from, what once was gorgeous full color photos that just made people want to buy things and came through influencers, and now it's coming to a more authentic and everyday place. And I think a lot of that trend, as it strengthens, which it's doing, is going to impact how we create content, and how we use it in our digital marketing strategies. Authenticity, though, is a bit of a double-edged sword. So just as quickly as you can have, huge, really positive consumer response to messaging that you put out, they can see something in it that you didn't intend, and it can go the opposite way. So I think the industry, the digital marketing industry, finding that balance between authenticity and everyday kind of reality, but not stepping over the edge into inadvertently offending thousands of people with a single tweet. I think that one that is going to be interesting to watch as companies sort of struggle a little bit to find their positioning in it.
And lastly, we always ask the same question on the show, which is, if you could bottle up one personality trait you have yourself, Nadaline, that you could pass on to others, what would it be?
Ooh, I don't know if it's a personality trait or a skill set, but I do think the one skill that would make monumental differences for young people in the industry, and people generally maybe, is practicing seeing yourself as a catalyst for change. A lot of people don't. A lot of people don't really feel their own ability to, change environments, shape policies, or achieve goals for themselves personally, never mind for a company. So the skill set that makes the difference between delivering and not is being able to see yourself as the catalyst that makes change happen. And if you really believe that, then you don't get knocked back. I think that people forget how intimidating marketing can be. You're putting out social media posts and you're putting out content and nobody's responding to it, or maybe you put something out and somebody writes, well, that was totally rubbish. And at that point, you just want to go home and get in bed and pull the duvet over your head. Seeing yourself as having that power to drive change gives resilience in marketing, and resilience is what, supports the journey.
Well, great answer, Nadaline. Yeah, I'm all for resilience, and yeah, I think that's a brilliant way to end the show. Thank you so much for being on the show. I hope everyone listening has really enjoyed listening to Nadaline, and yeah, thank you.
Not at all. It was a pleasure to be here, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.